This is all about Beethoven. It may not seem like it, but we're going to talk about the Moonlight Sonata. The Moonlight Sonata, everybody says, is about moonlight. But in fact, a critic called it the Moonlight Sonata 5 years after Beethoven died. Beethoven never heard the words Moonlight Sonata. Beethoven wrote this for the young girl he just fallen in love with. We all think of Beethoven as like an old, cantankerous guy with stomach problems, and he can't get a girl, and he's deaf, etc. And that was true later on. But initially, he was dashing. He was well-dressed. He was good-looking. He was Taylor Swift. He was the only game in Europe. There was Goethe, and there was Beethoven. That was it. There was nobody else. Haydn was dead, just about dead. Haydn died when Beethoven was about 5 or 6. So there was nobody. We didn't have rock and roll. We didn't have radio. We didn't have TV. We didn't have, doo-wop. Nothing. We just had Beethoven. And so he was hot. He could get any girl he wanted, and he only taught countesses, princesses, baronesses. He taught very wealthy, very beautiful young women, and they all were in love with him. And he was in love with every one of them. There was a young girl who he was in love with all of them, but there was one girl who fell in love with him. She was a countess, and her parents totally disapproved of it. Her sister said, "You can never see him again. This is horrible." When Beethoven dedicated a song to her, his friend, Prince Lichnowsky, said, "Don't ever do that again. You can't dedicate anything to her. No one can know because it's so inappropriate. I mean, you're a commoner. She's a countess. You can't let anyone know you're in love with each other." So he didn't dedicate anything to her. He dedicated stuff to everybody he knew, and he sold dedications for a lot of money to a lot of his friends. But he never dedicated. He dedicated one little song to her, and that's it. Nobody knew about them. He would go down, he taught her every day for free. So that told you something already, right? Her mother went to Vienna to introduce her 2 beautiful daughters to the greatest musician of the age, Beethoven. And he said, seeing these 2 beautiful girls, I will teach them for free, forever. And he went down to their castle in Hungary. They had 8,000 acres, a beautiful Walt Disney-like white castle. And they had this wonderful time. They sat by the lake, which was part of the estate. They went to the gigantic Hungarian Sea that was very close to the castle, where they would go to these great restaurants on the side of the sea. On Friday night, there'd be fireworks, just like there is now. They had this incredibly romantic time. And so Beethoven thought he would write something, a sonata, to her. Her name was Josephine, by the way. And that sonata turned out to be the Moonlight Sonata. Of course, he couldn't put her name on it, so he put somebody else's name on it. So ever since then, there have been books, there have been movies about the wrong girl. Everyone got it wrong until literally 4 years ago. No one knew. In 1957, they discovered 25 letters, 12 from Beethoven and 13 from Beethoven and 12 from Josephine to each other. Mad, passionate love letters. Only in 1957. They were never translated into English. So no person in America knew they existed. Only literally 14 years ago were they translated, and did critics in America, scholars, start to realize, wait a minute, he wrote no letters to any of these other girls who were supposedly his immortal beloved. He called her his immortal beloved. And he said, forever me, forever you, forever us. They were madly in love, but her mother needed her to marry a count. So she married a count. He was 30 years older than she was. He had no money. He married her for her money. She married him. Her mother had her marry him for his money, but he didn't have any. So, and 4 years later, he died. He ran a wax museum. This is pathetic, right? I mean, and all the time, every day, Beethoven kept giving her lessons at the piano. So, of course, she was not in love with this so-called count, right, who changed his name because he was so disreputable, he couldn't actually be in Hungary under his real name. So his name was like Herr Müller, right? But later it was revealed, yes, he did have a title somewhere, but he died, leaving her penniless, same as before, loving Beethoven, Beethoven loving her. But the mother was at it again, and within a few years, she found another count for poor Josephine to marry. This was a total gold digger. He had no money at all, but the check was in the mail. The money was coming. The money never came. He had no money. He lived off her money. He finally got his hands on it and bought a castle with it, but he could, for the down payment, but he couldn't afford the next payment or the next payment, so he lost the castle. And with it, her entire inheritance was about $14 million in today's money. It was a lot of money. So she had zero. He left her. He took their children together, and he went to Estonia, and basically never came back. She never wanted to marry Beethoven because she'd lose her children, but she lost her children anyhow. And finally, she ended up, they had this unbelievable rendezvous, Beethoven and Josephine, in Prague, and I won't go into the details of it, but there was a child whom they named Minona, which is backwards for anonym, which means anonymous. So the father was anonymous. Nobody could know who the father was. It was Beethoven. It was his only child. Minona was totally different from the other kids. She was a general. She had her own opinions. She was talented. She had musical ability. None of the other kids had the slightest thing. It was obvious she was Beethoven's daughter. That was Josephine's seventh child. She had an eighth child with her math tutor. By that time, she was living in a hut. She had no money at all. She was supported really on money that her sister gave her and her brother, but they stopped giving her money, so she had no money at all. She was incredibly sick. All of her 8 children left her, including Beethoven's. She died in poverty, in an unmarked grave, and yet every single person in this story, all the girls who were Beethoven's girlfriends and to me dedicated sonatas and symphonies and other things, are buried within 200 feet of him in the Schubert Park in Vienna, the Viennese cemetery. His whole life was within 200 feet buried. And so all I can say is that the Moonlight Sonata is the souvenir of that tragic love affair, which they had a daughter, but they could never marry. She died penniless. It turned out Beethoven made lots of money. He was Beethoven. The Fifth Symphony, the Ninth Symphony, he made tons of money, lots of students. He was wealthier than anybody that her mother wanted to fix her up with. And today, their house, they lost all their money, the Brunswicks. They had no money. They had to sell the house to the emperor. Then it eventually ended up in the Department of Agriculture, and today they cultivate experimental beets on this property. Ironically, Beethoven's name, Beethoven means beet garden, Beethoven. Ludwig van Beethoven, Luigi. That was what he called himself, Luigi. His name means Louis, Ludwig. Van, not noble, not like a great knight or something, but simply Luigi of Beethoven, the beet garden, Luigi of the beet garden. So that great palace went from beets to beets. And today, the only thing that makes it there is that every week they play Beethoven on the island where Beethoven and Josephine fell in love, where he wrote the Moonlight Sonata. He also wrote the Appassionata. He wrote the Appassionata Sonata there, also in that same house. He wrote a lot of things there. He was very fond of it. But so I want you to think of this sonata as fireworks. It's the fireworks by the lake, by the Hungarian Sea. And from that melody in the third movement, he took out 3 notes. And those are the very famous notes of the beginning of the sonata, which you all know, which are these notes. And those 3 notes mean forever me, forever you, forever us.